Um, yeah. So what's up, man? We were just we're kind of reminiscing or putting the pieces together, but where we met before. So speaking of Miami, what'd you think? Had you been down to a conference before?
No, that was my first one. So I've kind of been thrown into the deep end this year since January because um, I'm a relative noob and I just started working full time in the industry in January. And so I've been kind of going to my first conferences and meetups and like shaking the hands of guys like you who I've been listening to and interacting online with for the last couple of years, right? Basically since March 2020, the COVID crash. So definitely full on the conference scene is amazing. If you've never experienced it, I thought Bitcoin Miami was unbelievable. Obviously, I'm in the deep end of the mining side of things, so I just spent most of my time around the mining stage and the uh, the mining booths in the conference floor. So I didn't have to interact too much with the quote unquote altcoins or however you like to call them.
Right. Well, I just so you got in to the like you're kind of orange pilled in March 2020, and then you started working in the space recently, early this year.
Yeah, man. Like I don't want to over represent myself here at all. I'm definitely not an OG.
No, no,
I,
I mean,
I
I'm
am
not.
I'm definitely a relative noob. I only fell down the rabbit hole in March of 2020 when the market crashed and then COVID came down. The lockdowns that they seem to feel are necessary for our own safety, right? So obviously that sent us a lot of us down the rabbit hole of wondering and asking, what's actually going on, what's actually happening in our financial system, in our political system, and
Mm,
why are we subject to these mandates from unelected bureaucrats that are actually dictating how I'm allowed to live my life, down to the granular level of literally locking us inside our own houses. So I'm sure it was a wake up call for a lot more people than just me, but essentially that was the beginning of the trajectory. And now 2 years and a bit later, this is where I find myself.
yeah, it's interesting because like just a few minutes ago, I was going through some of your texts, and you had recently retweeted a thread that you put out in like I guess spring of 2021. And two things. One, I didn't even see, I didn't like the tweet at the time, I guess, because it just slipped by the radar because you were recommending a book called The Rebel. And I was just reading some of the tweets or some of your summaries or impressions of it. And it seems awesome. Like I haven't heard anyone recommend that book before, but I'm definitely going to have to look into it after we finish up here today. And I mean, speaking of like being a relative noob, I mean, you certainly seem to have like dived head first. I mean, you shared like a collection of your books, and I think you even like took each one and maybe summarized it a little bit. And it's like it's not even the starter kit for Bitcoiners. It's like a fairly extensive selection of books to really help construct a perspective around what's going on and what should be going on and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, what's it been like since you realized that because of what was happening around COVID that everything was kind of fucked? I mean, how have things changed for you in terms of your perspective since then? We'll get into what you're doing for work a bit later.
Yeah, man. So first of all, I'll say that I'm an introvert historically. I've been a segment of the silent majority for most of my life, but I've been an avid reader for all of my life. So just always read books, read books, read books. Um, a big believer in if you don't know history, then you're just going to be one of those ostriches that sticking your head in the sand and hoping that everything's going to work out in the present and in the future. So if you don't actually know and study history, then you can't prepare for the future. So um, yeah, and so then basically once I started to stop being a member of the silent majority and one of the vocal minority, and I have to actually thank Marty Bent for that because in the early days of Clubhouse, we were chatting on Clubhouse, and he's like, stand up for what you believe in and start speaking out for what you believe in, and who knows what kind of impact that's going to have on the world. Like maybe the majority of people will think you crazy, like my mom or my whoever in the legacy world that we're used to, that know us from the old days. But who knows what kind of impact you're having on the rest of the silent majority. And so honestly, that's just one way that I feel like I can put my stuff out there, is just the threads on the books that I'm reading. So like I say right in my pinned tweet, that it's just essentially a distillation of the thoughts that I gather from all the books that I read, and then I just summarize those in threads for each book, and then I just pin that as a thread of threads, just to show everyone and tell everyone and share with people, you know, the thoughts in the books that have been transformative in my own journey, in my own life, in my own thoughts. And whether or not anyone finds that useful, who knows? But for me, it's definitely useful for me, and I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah, that's awesome. So in terms of, you know, you said you've always been a big reader and probably somewhat of a unconventional thinker, perhaps, or somewhat anti-establishment by the sounds of it. But how did like coming into Bitcoin and learning about Bitcoin, how, if at all, did the pursuit of understanding Bitcoin reframe perspectives on, you know, a variety of the big things that actually go toward forming our perspective? So whether it be economics, or whether it be politics, or whether it be ideas around, you know, value and meaning and these sorts of things, like, did any of that shift and change, you know, since you've been pursuing understanding of Bitcoin?
So I like to tell people that I was a Bitcoiner before I found Bitcoin. And you might know kind of what I'm getting at there, but like I say, I'm a relative noob to Bitcoin, but the values I was raised with, the critical thinking, quote unquote, rebellious skills that are endearing to me in my personal life and the lives of others, kind of embody the qualities of Bitcoin. So then when I found Bitcoin in March of 2020, everything just clicked and fit together. It was whatever you want to call it. It was the moment where you realize, oh, this is why this is happening. This is why things are set up this way. And this is actually an answer for everything I see that's wrong with the money and our incentives in the fiat world, right? Mm-hmm. So yes, everything changed when I found it, but everything didn't change with me. It just was a manifestation of the qualities that I had already been embodying my entire life, in my opinion.
Yeah, and my experience was very similar to that. However, there's definitely, you know, there's been a lot of change, to be fair, but like you, like a lot of the principles that you might encounter in Bitcoin, many of them I'd already identified as being very valuable or important principles, and have tried to orient my life around them. However, one thing on the emotional, I guess, or psychological aspect of things was, I felt like even though I was aware of the problems at a fairly intimate level, I didn't see a way in which they could be rectified. They seemed insurmountable. And Bitcoin, once I realized what it was, or at least what I think it is, that turned around, and I started to feel that they could be resolved. And of course, that is like a 180 in terms of how you construe or imagine your future. You know, and you have hope.com in your Twitter handle. I mean, that, you know, that's the word, really, that you can be as aligned with these principles as much as you want, but if you exist in the context of a society or culture that you don't see having a direct path, or even a possible path to having them flourish or be amplified in the culture, then it can be a very isolating feeling for some. But now, when I identify Bitcoin as being a very viable solution to that problem, and even a better one than I could have ever conceived of, then that gets totally flipped. And then it, you know, that alienation turns to animation. It turns to energy. It turns to ambition. It turns into wanting to devote oneself to actualizing that latent potential. And so, was that something similar? Did something similar happen to you in that regard, like the emotional, psychological sort of domain?
Yeah, man, and I think you can see it manifested in what I'm choosing to spend my life and working on right now, right? So 2 years later, I'm working full time in Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining and the things that I feel are the most important things to be working on. And I love what Jack said at Bitcoin 2021 when he was still with Twitter. He's like, well, if Bitcoin needs me, I'm going to be leaving here and working full time on Bitcoin. And a year later, look what he's doing, right? So like people realize that what's the best use of our time and our energy that we could be doing at this moment in our lives. And kind of like once you realize all those factors that we've been talking about, like this is why we're here and this is why we're doing what we're doing at this point in time. We're not just existing in our pods in the fiat world, kind of waiting for the next party to forget about our crappy lives because the government's printing so much money that I have no purchasing power and my kids will never be able to afford to buy a house. Like, no, we like hope.com, like that hope is action manifested in our lives at this very moment, right?
Yeah. Basically, it inspires people to realize that they can take back control of their life in many respects, and then causes them to commit themselves to doing just that. And, and then of course it's nothing but a slew of, even though there might be, very large challenges ahead, and by no means is just understanding Bitcoin fix everything in life. But I mean, certainly if you speak to a lot of Bitcoiners that have had a similar experience, a lot of them will report that so many different metrics of their life have improved as a result of that understanding, and then devoting themselves to what is ultimately a cause larger than even themselves, and all the better that Bitcoin is structured in such a way that you can both give to the cause for both your own individual benefit and for the benefit of, the network and the cause as a whole.
Yeah, so we just dove deep into the metaphysical end here right off the bat. Hey, John,
Well, you know what I'm like.
Yeah, so everyone who starts listening, they're just like, okay, these guys are all already far in the deep end. But no, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, exactly, right.
So how did you make the determination to focus on the mining aspect of things?
Okay, so it just Steve Barber. I started listening to podcasts, right? So I was lucky enough that I'm an older dude, right? Like I'm on like my fourth, fifth life in my 9 life existence, if that's what you want to call it, in terms of careers, in terms of what I've done in my job and in my lives. And
You don't look that old.
I got married young and I have teenage daughters, and I'm at the point like I have a fiat legacy business where I was able to kind of transition out of and not. So the point is I had time in March 2020. In March 2020, when the market crashed, I had enough time to actually do the work to gain an understanding of what this thing is and what it actually means and what it does for people and for society. So because I spent the hours listening to podcasts and reading books and researching everything, right? Like I say, like it's not how long you've been in this thing. It's how much work you've allocated to this thing in terms of understanding it, right? So that's the proof of work in terms of your understanding of Bitcoin. So as a full-time job, essentially, like 8 hours a day, listening to podcasts, reading books since March of 2020, that's a kind of how much time that I've spent understanding it. And one of the podcasts very early on, probably in like April, was Steve Barber talking about mining Bitcoin off flare gas in the oil field. And I'm just a farm boy. I grew up in Alberta on a farm, working the land. As soon as I heard that, it blew my mind. I'm like, in the fields that I grew up harvesting grain off of, we could be mining Bitcoin off the wasted flare gas where all these gas wells are, right? blew my mind. So then that was the beginning of my Bitcoin mining journey rabbit hole. And then like as kind of a risk-taking entrepreneur, I'm like, well, I'm gonna try it out. So I got into it right away, started trying it, and luckily enough, it was pretty much the perfect time to get into it in terms of cost of hardware, and then the price started pumping that summer, right? So luck of timing and just kind of it all came together. And but essentially from a proof of work energy perspective, so here's where mining gets it for me. It's the mining is the singularity between proof of work energy production and proof of work money production. So it through the physical infrastructure that is absolutely required for Bitcoin mining, and that's machinery, that's rigs, that's generators, that's data centers, that's like all the metal, all the guys digging in the dirt, getting their hands dirty, which is required to produce a digital commodity, which is hash rate or Bitcoin. So there is a physical energy infrastructure required to produce digital monetary truth. And that's kind of how I view Bitcoin as monetary truth, right? And so that just clicked with my upbringing as a farmer, tied to the land, and recognizing the correlation and the manifestation of physical work, proof of work, to production of a commodity that provides value for society. That was like long-winded and rambling, but
no, it's good. I mean, I want more, right? So you saw it that way, and you said you got involved at the right time. Rigs were cheap, price hadn't pumped yet. But what did you end up doing? Did you put ASICs on one of those flare gas wells, or like how did you start tinkering with this? Because it's super interesting that mining is increasingly, first we had like people building their own nodes, right? So people that never would have thought they would be building hardware, in any capacity. And building a node is not really building hardware because it's very simple, but like people would go and tinker with that and put it together and play around with it. The same is kind of happening with hardware wallets. And I think people are starting to come to appreciate two things. One, it's not as scary and complicated, not so much that you shouldn't give it a whirl. And so there's a lot of like hobbyist mining happening now. And two, there's this growing appreciation for one, just how mind-blowing Bitcoin mining is, where it has so many applications. One, in terms of like, well, what do you do with the excess heat, and what can you mine off of, and what energy sources and that kind of stuff. And then just the recognition that like, wow, I can monetize energy at source now. And all I need is like a, Starlink satellite to facilitate all this, and I'm off to the races. And isn't that kind of like insanely revolutionary and mind-blowing? And everyone's just, I think, just still trying to appreciate what the implications of that are. And part of that process is just going out there and trying, things. And that there seems to be a real cottage industry forming around that. So how did you start tinkering?
Absolutely, man. And I should qualify, like, I didn't come to this singularity realization overnight. Like, absolutely not. It's been a 2-year journey, right, of recognizing that the energy and Bitcoin and sound money as a proof of work mechanism really is unequivocally the singularity. But in terms of dipping my toes, getting into it, I'm like I've owned and ran businesses my whole life. Like, I've been working on the farm since I was 8 years old, right? I was driving the combine and the grain truck for my dad when I was 12 years old in the field, right? So I'm used to trying things out. I'm used to being willing to take a risk to see how things are going to work out. So I dipped my toes with a few hosted rigs with my good buddy Mason at Blockware Solutions. And at the time, the metrics didn't make sense at all, right? Like, because price was still way too low, and these things didn't cash flow, or they didn't ROI forever. But I saw I saw like the hundreds of millions of dollars that the big boys were pouring into the industry at this point in time. I'm like, well, if they're doing it, I'm gonna risk like 0.101% of my capital and see what happens. And it worked out awesome, right? But then the metrics started turning around, and then everyone started pouring in. So yeah, then I just started. I got a couple of hash huts from Steve Barber, and just little 50 kilowatt hash huts, and put them on one of his stranded gas wells, and started doing that. And it's kind of just grown from there, and into this year. Now I'm doing working full time for Luxor Technologies, helping them build out their mining, their prop mining division.
So was that something that Upstream offered, or just because you knew Steve in some capacity? Because I didn't know they did like hosted huts sort of thing. Like I didn't know you could buy the hut and they would plug it in on a gas well for you.
They did for a very short time when I got in. So they normally didn't, and Steve doesn't now, but they did for a short time because he just had a well available. But yeah, now it's not an option, and we've since moved those data centers off to another site. So
Gotcha. I'm gonna have to pause one sec, Shaun. That dryer that I mentioned, of course, been waiting for it all day and it came in now. So let's just both mute our mics and I'll be back in a few minutes, hopefully.
okay.
All right. New dryer in the house.
Right on, man.
So where were we? You were saying how um, you bought the rigs from Steve, plugged them in. He doesn't offer that now. Is that just because he doesn't have like hosting wells to offer people?
I won't pretend to speak for Steve, but
Right.
he's made it clear multiple times that he doesn't necessarily think that mining specifically is the best business for him to be in. He'd rather use his skills to build his manufacturing business and essentially invent products to create value for the industry, right? You can see what he did with the black box and all his other data centers, right?
I've heard him say that a few times. I mean, that's another great example of like this cottage industry where, you know, now anyone can have a few rigs mining right outside their house, low noise, you know, and now the price of ASICs are coming down. So perhaps, you know, it's a good time to do something like that. But it's really compelling that everyone, well, one, I think people want Sats flow, right? People want income in Bitcoin. And, you know, to the extent that you get KYC free coin, and that's a benefit as well. But I think, you know, there's also some element of people want to be contributing to, you know, securing the network, even if that's somewhat dubious, especially if you're using like hosting facilities and pools and that kind of thing. But it's interesting to see it evolve, you know, as we keep saying, like as people's minds get blown about what's really going on here, it's like, it's just too compelling not to dabble in at least.
Yeah, you said basically the crux of the issue that caught my attention too is Sats flow. So Sats flow is greater than cash flow, and coming from the legacy real estate world, which is what the business that I've been doing for the last 20 years. So rental properties, construction, property appraisals. So just deep in the fiat debt-based world, right? And you know, like we all know how the expansion of debt because of our fiat monetary system has manifested itself into our real estate values, because they most of their value now, especially in Canada, is a store of value, guarding against that debasement, right? So but in regards to rental properties, right, it's like, oh, you need cash flow from your rental property to pay off a 30-year mortgage, however long that is. So I'm used to making like, oh, maybe $100 or $200 a month per door from a rental property as cash flowing off an appreciating asset, in the hopes that 30 years I'm going to have something for my retirement, right? That's the general idea in the cash flow real estate business that I come from. So then when you talk about Sats flow and in the mining business, this is what really caught my attention, is that you're buying a hard asset in the miners, and you're cash flowing it in Satoshis, and depending on the market cycle, that your ROI on that investment is anywhere from 8 months to 24 months. So instead of paying off a mortgage on a rental property in 30 years, you're paying off your business and your ROI and your hard asset that's cash flowing you Sats every single minute of every single day in less than 2 years. And that to me also blew my mind. So I'm like, why would I be spending millions of dollars on real estate to make like $100 a month in cash flow in the hopes that the government doesn't screw me in 30 years and I might have something to show for it? I might as well buy some miners and pay them off in like a tenth of the time and be cash flowing Satoshis, the hardest and purest money that the world has ever invented or ever seen, right? So that to me was a no-brainer.
Yeah, no shit. I know that it's super hard, like because of the difficulty adjustment and the changes in price of the ASICs and the change in the price of Bitcoin itself, that it's hard to do like, you know, revenue models and that kind of stuff with Bitcoin mining. But have you ever attempted to, or have you calculated like a ballpark yield on, you know, let's say a miner costs 10 grand to procure, and then whatever the income the Sats flow you're able to derive from it on an annualized basis, like what kind of a yield a miner spits out, or is there just too many moving parts?
Yeah, and I'm not like a huge financial metrics guy. I'm kind of like, let's go plug these things and do it and figure it out and see how it works out. And that's maybe not the best way to go about things, but uh, all I can say is like when I first got into it, we were looking at like 400% ROIs. In terms of yield, I'm not sure exactly, but now obviously now that the market's come down since then, difficulty's gone up, hash rates come on the network. Yeah, you're down to still like 60 to 70% ROI, right? So it's still amazing when you look at in compared to legacy businesses, but it's not as good as when I started, that's for sure. I mean, and whether that's, in my opinion, a function of the market cycle as we go into the next halving in the next 18 months, and then what's going to happen with the price of Bitcoin relative to hash rate and difficulty, right?
Do you think, I don't know if you've looked back on like the 2017 peak era, but there was a lot of like hosted mining services at the time, way less like well run or professional operations than currently exist. But like, again, because of all the hysteria, or not hysteria, but all the excitement, like people got into it, they were paying crazy rates for their energy. And of course, like when the market turned, everyone got roasted and people were underwater, like in their mining investments, well, in their Bitcoin investment, but in their mining investments for a while. Do you see something similar happening now or in the next 6 to 12 months, where like all this excitement, a lot of activity in the industry, even though I think people are fairly, they've learned from that, and maybe they're less willing to accept, super high rates of power and stuff like that. But do you think it goes down into another period where it's not such a rosy business and things get consolidated and reshuffled, before the next big swing up?
Yeah, man, it's happening right now. We're right at the start of it. Absolutely. Like, and especially Bitcoin mining as a ruthlessly competitive and one of the last, probably the last free market to exist out there, that's not completely captured by regulation and the moats of large corporations yet. It's subject to ruthless competitiveness of the market metrics as well, right? We can't just call up our friendly neighborhood government official and ask for a bailout when the market turns against us, right? We have to be prepared for worst case scenarios. And like you say, so I don't know if you're familiar with the metric of hash price, but essentially it's the profitability of a miner on any given day based on the hash rate and the price of Bitcoin and the difficulty. So like you say, in the 2018 bear market, we bottomed out at I think it was around 6 cents hash price. Right now, we've dropped from 20 to about 12 in the last 3 weeks. So we're well on our way to revisiting the 2018 lows, in my opinion. And that's just going to keep heading down there as we move into the next halving. So in that regards, yes, absolutely. If you don't prepare yourself for worst case scenarios, you're not going to make it through the bear market in this industry. And I love kind of this analogy of Bitcoin mining as a survivability game, right? So you and me and one other guy, whoever it is, let's say Steve Barber, we're out for a walk in the woods, right? In your native Newfoundland, or where I live in BC, probably, because there's lots of bears in the woods out here. So we're walking through the woods, all of a sudden a grizzly pops out behind us. What do? We all take off. Most likely our fight or flight kicks in.
Right.
We start booking it. Me and
Whoever's
you,
the slowest.
we only have to be faster than our slowest buddy, and he's going to get eaten by the bear.
Right.
If we survive, we get stronger because those guys drop off the network. And then as long as we can survive that worst case 6 cent hash price, everyone, the guys that can't, drop off the network, difficulty drops, our profitability goes up, and we're stronger going into the next cycle. But if you don't survive, you're just getting eaten by the bear, and see you later, right?
Yeah. So generally speaking, like the hash price is basically that has to be your maximum energy cost, right? Broadly speaking. Because if the hash price is 12 cents and yours is 18 cents, then you're underwater pretty much.
Right, right. Like hash price is, I'm probably going to screw this up, but it's like dollars per terahash per second per day. So that's how much your miner is generating on that any given day based on the network difficulty and the price of Bitcoin, right? So it's just an easy metric to say, to a profitability metric of the mining industry at any snapshot in time.
Right. And so how does one, other than trying to find the cheapest energy possible, prepare for these downturns and these consolidations? Like what other variables would one be considering there?
Yeah, it's an energy game, man. Like we know the singularity of Bitcoin mining and energy, it's all merging, especially now that the financialization of the mining industry is in full force with all the Wall Street fiat cuck bucks coming into the game as well, right? So generally speaking, we know the best operators out there and the biggest guys out there are sub 4 cent power all in, and a lot of them are way lower than that. And so if you're 2.5 to 4 cent power and you're translating to mining a Bitcoin like at sub 10,000, a lot of guys are down to like $6,000 is their cost to mine a Bitcoin. You just realize that's what you have to compete against. If you don't think you can compete against that, then there's a high likelihood that you're going to get wrecked and you're going to get eaten by the bear, right? So,
right.
So if you don't have an edge, it's like anything. What are you good at and what's your edge? If you don't have an edge in the market, you probably shouldn't be in that market. If you can't source the lowest cost of energy, if you don't have the expertise to put together an efficient operation, know how to actually run a business efficiently to achieve that lowest cost of production, then there's a good chance you're not gonna make it. But I mean, that's just the nature of a proof of work system that rewards you based on the skills you put into it, right?
Totally. And so as a consideration, if you are one of those that are basically underwater, you either have to determine whether it's in your best interest to just turn them off and wait until it's profitable again, or sell the rigs to someone who is profitable. And are those your two options in that scenario?
Yeah, if you can turn them off, like hopefully you're not locked into a PPA, a power purchase agreement at 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And then your rigs aren't posted as collateral for that energy provider. And then all of a sudden you're underwater and you have a $50,000 power bill every month that you can't afford to pay. Like your business is done, right? And they're taking your miners and you're screwed. So generally speaking, yeah, it all depends on your operation, but if you can afford to turn them off, or if you can afford to pay your power bill for a few months losing money and hope that the Bitcoin price recovers until it swings back up again, then it's just how long you can survive essentially, right?
What do you think the influence of the fiat maximalists, the cuck bucks, has on the industry? Because like right on the surface, the first thing that comes to mind is because of the access to financing of public companies, when there is a downturn, they're more able to leverage the time value of money, or they're more able to leverage financing capabilities to see them through these races that we were referring to. And so they're more able to survive. And then when things become good again, they've consolidated the position even further. And of course, from like a hardcore Bitcoin, and capture and security point of view, like, does this mean that over time things are consolidating into the entities that are the most easy and likely to be captured and regulated and be corrupted in some capacity? So what else? What are the other implications of the financialization of the mining industry, let's say?
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, honestly, I see that as a huge risk factor. You got the pubcos who have easy access to zero cost of capital, debt, and equity. And for example, a lot of them aren't even selling any of their mined coin. They're just using the debt they raised to pay their power bills and their expenses. So yes, if they're able to just keep existing on fiat debt that's raised easily from the public markets, they're going to be able to survive longer than the guy who has to actually produce something of value to pay their bills every month, right? And so, like you say, what's that going to do? They're going to be able to eat up the guys who can't survive, and then centralize that hash rate into their fiat entities. How bad is this going to get? No one knows, right? Like Bitcoin has a way of kind of enforcing decentralization through market events, right? Like you look at the China Bitcoin mining ban in last summer, 60% of the hash rate. Oh, we're going to mine Bitcoin, or we're going to ban mining. All of a sudden, we're all in Texas, we're all in North America. It's a lot more distributed now, right? So, is this the next centralization risk? I think it's definitely something to keep an eye on. We definitely aren't playing a fair fight. Whenever we're going up against the fiat cuckbucks of Wall Street, who are able to raise at effectively negative real interest rates when inflation's 8.5% that they say, but we know the real rate is like 15 or 20%, and they're raising capital at 1% or 2%. Like, it's exactly what Saylor's doing. He has a speculative attack on the dollar to buy Bitcoin, but they're doing it to mine Bitcoin. Is that a centralization risk? I think so. How bad is that going to get? No one knows, right?
What are the trade-offs, or like what are there any benefits to mining Bitcoin by operators that are not public and that are, let's say private non-fiat maxi miners? Are there any benefits that those operators have to counterbalance them? Like, one might just be that, yeah, you're a public company and you can access cheap capital, but it also means if regulations change, you're the first to have to shut down, and there's nothing you can say or do about it. It's just like regulation happens and you're done. Whereas some of the more under the radar or private miners may be able to operate in the shadows for longer, and maybe that's somewhat of a redeeming attribute on their side of the ledger. Like, what other benefits do you think there are to being, non-fiat miners?
Yeah, and we're gonna have to talk about like maximalism after this as well, a little bit maybe, but
Sure.
just because I'm not a toxic maximalist. We're all subject to the fiat world, whatever. We can get into that, right? But I do recognize the fact that Bitcoin is the best money that's ever been invented, and so I would rather focus on producing Bitcoin than fiat, right? So, but that like you say can be one of the correcting mechanisms that comes along, because that is a regulatory risk when you see huge mines like Riot down in Riot Windstone down in Rockdale, Texas by Austin. They have 600-700 megawatts just sitting there in structures that are built on the ground. The governor comes and visits them. They're going to be the first ones to go down if all of a sudden regulations turn against them, right? And then that'll be like the difficulty adjustment for regulation. So now all these private miners who are off grid or not necessarily, or aren't public, like they're going to benefit if something like that happens. So definitely a trade-off. Yeah.
Are there any other benefits to, and when I say fiat mining, I mean like appealing to the fiat maxis, as Steve is often likes to characterize them. Are there any other benefits that you can see to being smaller, more scrappy, less beholden to public markets, less beholden to regulations, that kind of thing?
Oh, absolutely, man. Number one, for guys like me and anyone who wants to run a private company, like that's your sovereignty, right? So as soon as you take money from someone, you don't work for yourself anymore, right? So that's why, in my opinion, there's always going to be many small private guys, whether that's a whole bunch of plebs running rigs in their houses, in their black boxes, just for the fact that they want non-KYC sats, or the fact that they're heating their houses, they're piping the air into their furnaces and offsetting their heating costs, and trading that for Satoshis, or whether you have small private companies that are putting a few data centers on flared natural gas sites, or whatever else they're doing. Yeah, that's the trade-offs of those guys who are going to benefit from true self-sovereignty, from not being able to be captured by any of that regulatory risk. And even the fact that they're mobile, right? So if you use a mobile data center, in 12 hours or 6 hours, you can have that thing picked up and moved off site and somewhere else if something happens, right? So this is the beautiful thing about decentralized monetization of stranded energy assets. There's no such thing as a stranded energy asset right now that you have Bitcoin mining, and as Saifedean likes to put it, like it's the first location agnostic monetization of electricity through mining Bitcoin, right? Anywhere, we can go anywhere. Marty Bent says we take the market to the molecule. Wherever the molecule is, we're going to mine the Bitcoin. So in that regard, it's amazing. We're just going to move if something happens, essentially. And the big fiat pubcos, they probably won't have that option if something does happen.
Right. So just adaptability, flexibility in the event that landscape changes. And in this world today and in Bitcoin, it kind of always does. So, you never, I guess both approaches have their risks. What do you want to say about maximalism? What's on your mind?
I'll say one more thing about the financialization, because I guess since the financialization of the mining industry, we've seen this trend toward the big guys putting out the most hash rate. And so essentially a bifurcation of the network, right? Where you have the big fiat pubcos controlling the majority of the hash rate on the network. And then you have however many percent of the little private guys and the plebs who are off here just surviving because that's what they want to do and they believe in it and it's still profitable for them, but they're never going to be able to compete with the amount of hash rate that the big guys are putting on. So you have the bifurcation of the network and the mining network, but these guys are never going to go away. So no matter what happens, the network will be secured, in my opinion. And that's a beautiful thing.
That is a beautiful thing. But I guess as we opened up this part of the discussion with, it's like, well, the fiat mining codes potentially outlive the little guy because they can stay alive longer in bad conditions. And then, as is always the case in public fiat markets, consolidation happens over time. At a certain point in the future, one massive conglomerate or one massive company owns all the built up or built in mining capacity. To what extent does that increase the chances of 51% attacks and all that kind of stuff? I mean, obviously this has been thought about by many people and it's perhaps one of the risks, but it's, as I think you said already, it is inevitable as long as the fiat system exists in its current form. And that is who the hell knows how long that's going to be the case. I mean, how long is capital going to be so easily available? I mean, sure, as long as the money printer is like on overdrive, but at some point that has to stop. And what kind of a position does it put the fiat miner or what kind of position does it put those miners in, and how able are they, how resilient are they, and how able are they to survive? And, all sorts of unknowns, I guess
we can't predict the future, man. We can just prepare for it. Right. So, yeah, no one knows exactly how it's going to play out, but anyway, yeah. So toxic maxis have had a really bad name in the last year and a half, 2 years, right? Whatever that is that a function of the mainstreaming of Bitcoin as we went through the last bull market last year up to 69K? And then is everyone who believes in Bitcoin all of a sudden a toxic maxi? Do we hate everyone else? No, like just get rid of toxic and just say Bitcoin maximalist, right? And that doesn't mean we hate our fellow man for what they believe in, or what, in my opinion, is simply a lack of time spent understanding this thing that we call Bitcoin, right? It's not their fault that whether through choice or ignorance or lack of ability to spend the time to do the work, that they don't have the level of understanding that some of us do because we've been able to spend more time on it. I don't hate them for that. Do I recognize the fact that Bitcoin is the purest and the best and the most beautiful manifestation of monetary truth to ever exist? Yes. And am I going to spend my time on that because I recognize that and I realize that? Yes. But I don't hate my brother for what he chooses to believe in at any certain point in time. And in that regard, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, but I personally hate the term toxic maximalist and how people just want to label us with that, right?
Yeah. I mean, my perspective on all this, which I've shared a few times, is aside from like a very, 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 very small group of people that are just like pretty much kind of tweaked and insane and like throw their bullshit and insecurities and whatever else is going on in their life onto other people at any given reason, whether it's Bitcoin or anything else. Aside from them, the toxic maximalism thing is a joke. Like it's so obviously a mischaracterization of what's happening here. And it's not to say that people don't come into the space, and if they espouse some false understanding of what's going on, they get treated in a manner that they're not accustomed to in terms of the niceties or sensibilities of, you know, the discourse that they may have engaged in the past. But it's like all those people don't hate those people. I think, you know, they're, first of all, we're all just figuring out what it's like to engage in this thing and be upgraded by this thing and have this level of freedom available to us. And perhaps there's an element of just like excitement to it all. But I honestly think, well, I don't think in most cases it's a proper characterization of the discourse that's happening, but to the extent that it is, like to the extent that like too many have fun staying poors or not going to make it, they're being dropped and stuff like that. I've always kind of liked it because to me, and like I don't engage in it much myself because it's just not how I get down. Like if someone's not getting it and I'm doing like I make a decent effort to explain it, then I'm happy to just let it go ununderstood. You know, I don't need people to understand the thing that I am super passionate about. But what I see it primarily a function of, and this probably happens, is a subconscious phenomenon mostly, is that it's like Bitcoin espouses and engenders or is a representation of certain principles, I think. And I think those principles are truth and freedom and honesty and integrity. And, you know, we could go down the list perhaps, but I think, and those are represented in Bitcoin, and they're rubbing off on the people that they're both attracting and rubbing off on people that attempt to understand and engage with Bitcoin. And I feel like there's a recognition that humility is a very important aspect of learning the truth about anything, right? And if we're kind of circling around an extremely profound truth, then humility is even more required. And when people come in, you know, and usually it's like some well-known person who's established credibility in another area, and they expect, you know, to be treated a certain way, and perhaps as a result they're kind of egotistical, you know, the proverbial I just heard about Bitcoin, I'm here to fix Bitcoin sort of person. I think all the vitriol that they might get, and perhaps not, that's not the most appropriate word, but, you know, perhaps the less than welcoming rhetoric that they receive is a reflection of how they're attempting to engage this asset, but more importantly, this culture. And what I see the function of that being is simply a means of revealing character. And I do think, like, I think one of the things, because there is a parallel culture being formed here. I mean, as we often talk about, money is the base layer. And so if we change out the base layer, it's going to foster and elicit a different culture on top of it. And one of the primary like concerns of the people engaging in this culture seems to be they want to know the truth of the character of the people that they're engaging with. Like, how much can I trust you? What's your integrity like? How much do you, are you an honest actor? All that kind of stuff. And this type of rhetoric, or this phenomenon of the quote unquote, like the immune system, the hornets, the toxic maximalism, seems to be a very useful or effective mechanism or filter for discovering aspects of people's character. And if you take it with a grain of salt, and if you like kind of have fun with it and you give it back and you just keep going no matter what you get in return because you're intent on understanding, what's really going on here, then you're welcomed in with open arms. And people like, you were down at the conference recently, like it's the most loving, like, community you could ever hope to be a part of. Like, people are so generous and engaging and welcoming, that kind of stuff. But there's this initial, like, what are you about sort of feeling out process. And if you fail that test, if you get all, pissed off and offended by I can't believe you speak to me like that. And like, and you stop pursuing it as a result, then I think that says a lot about your character. And I think that's the point.
Absolutely, man. Well said. It's like Max Kaiser likes to say, like, Bitcoin's a mirror, right? It just reflects back on us what we are. A lot of times people can't handle that.
Sure. I mean, we all have stuff we don't like about ourselves, right? And all the stuff that perhaps we're ignoring and we'd rather not be confronted with. And here you have this like raging hornet's nest of signal that's just pretty much maybe putting it in your face at times. And there's two ways you can handle that: confront, recognize, keep moving forward, or turn from it. And I think that's kind of what's going on with the toxic maximalism stuff, and why I appreciate it, even when it happens to, close friends, when they bear the brunt of it. I think there's still a tremendous benefit and we have to understand, it's not like an intentional thing that everyone gets together and be like, this is how we're going to make sure people come into the community. This is an emergent phenomenon of behavior generated by the very thing that we're attempting to understand, which is Bitcoin. It's not like there's no ringleader here. Nobody's in charge of it. This is why what we should be asking is, the question should be, why is this thing eliciting this type of behavior in people? That's a more interesting question as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And to me, it's an immediate filter for the people who are intellectually honest enough and humble enough to accept the fact that they need to listen and learn, instead of just spout off their own opinions and project their own insecurities onto others, right? So
100%. I mean, like, and this is why we're here, right? Because if you and I'll speak for myself, but I feel like it might be the same with you. But if I was pursuing something and I came with a false notion of that which I was pursuing, and I was bold enough to express that when I showed up on the scene, which I probably wouldn't be, but for the sake of argument, let's say I am. And a bunch of people were like, you're a fucking idiot, go fuck yourself, you don't know what the hell you're talking about, all that kind of stuff. I feel like my response would be like, okay, but don't care, like still want to learn more and figure out what's going on here. And so, that it's just kind of a litmus test about how dedicated you are to understanding the truth or the meaning of the thing. And again, as you say, I mean, how much your ego is involved in maintaining some notion of yourself. And as a result, how does that hinder the degree to which you're able to be humble in the face of new information and new ideas and new people and all that kind of stuff.
And if you can get past that, you start to realize those people that are yelling at you are
the best,
the smartest, most intelligent, the nicest guys who will lay down for you at any point in time that you've ever come across in your entire existence.
Exactly.
But you have to get past yourself first in order to get there, right?
Right. And don't you think there should be somewhat of a gauntlet to gain access to something like that? Like that shouldn't just be, anyone who signs on the dotted line gets access to that. I mean, that is a tremendous asset in life to have. I've said this a bunch of times as well. And the two conferences that I've been in last year and this year have really like amplified this. But like now I can call several hundred people that I've met through Twitter and podcasts and the conferences, like pretty much best friends. Not that like we haven't spent the requisite time together to share experiences that really go into that, right? But like all the fertile ground is there, that all is that's needed for us to like become best friends or strengthen our friendship is just more experiences together. But like all the alignment of values and all the other stuff is there. And that's such a tremendous gift. It might be like one of the greatest gifts in life to have more trusting, loving, engaging relationships in one's life. And so that, there should be a cost to it to some degree, right? You shouldn't just be able to press a button and poof, it all appears, because then of course you're not going to appreciate it.
Yeah, man. But when you distill everything down in our lives, like the only barrier to greater learning or greater wisdom is our own
Yourself.
ego, right?
Mm.
So this is just, once again, Bitcoin boils everything down to first principles and the base layer of human existence in every aspect of our actions, right? Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's our relationships with other people, whether it's the mining industry, whether like it's the fundamental base layer of monetary truth, as I like to call it, right? And I would prefer to build off a foundation, a base layer foundation, rather than being focused on the 8th and 9th and 10th and 3rd and 4th order effects of something else that I don't really understand yet, right?
100%. 100%. And you say it's like it's the base layer monetary base layer, or base layer of monetary truth. And perhaps that is the right, moniker in terms of monetary to use. But like as you're saying that, and of course, as I've thought about and explored a lot in my stuff, it's like, what do you call the thing that distills every domain of perception and interaction to its bare truth? What the fuck do you call such a thing? That is a very unusual thing to encounter even. And it seems like it seems like monetary is too narrow of a moniker to use to describe such a thing, which again is why in a lot of my stuff I explore the religious or theological or philosophical connotations to all this stuff, because it seems to be relevant to the thinking that's been done in those areas before us, that's come before. But it just never ceases to blow my mind. And when I hear, people like you just say the same thing, like it strips everything down to what is true. It's like bare principles of what is most true and what is most valuable. And from that place, you're better able to orient your behavior in order to align with it, or to avail of it, or to engage it, or to contribute to it more, and to bring more of that value into your life, whether it be in the form of a relationship, or in the form of sats flow, or in the form of freedom and sovereignty, whatever it may be. It's fucking crazy.
Yeah, and I gotta be careful in my dealing with normies in the normie world. When you start
not
speaking
sound too crazy.
Yeah, when you start speaking about truth, and whether or not it is or it isn't, the fact remains that maybe a better way to put it is, Bitcoin is our monetary manifestation of truth. So maybe it's not truth, but it is the physical and digital representation and manifestation of the best form of truth that we know exists on this earth at this point in time. And I'm going to take full advantage of that.
100%. So speaking of which, what are you up to these days? Are you still, because I know I think you're working for a Bitcoin company, right? In the mining space. And you're also still, tinkering with your own rigs in certain places?
Yeah, full-time with Luxor Technologies. Luxor is a mining pool. I have my proof of work mining shirt on right now, even though you can't see it very good.
Nice.
Come on.
It's trying to blur it out.
Yeah, proof of work mining. Basically just doing the same thing for them that I was doing for myself, right? Just trying to plug in more miners, find cheap energy, deploy hash rate, but in a context of the vertical integration of their business. They're a software company, they're a mining pool. they're kind of an institutional advisory service, building out basically a full vertical stack of everything to do with Bitcoin software. Big looking into hash rate as a derivative, and then hedging products on top of that. So essentially, like the meeting of the fiat business world and this new thing we call the Bitcoin industry, and building out digital software products and physical infrastructure to meet every needs from a vertical integration standpoint. And yeah, they just got me super busy trying to plug in more miners, essentially, which is what I love doing. I go get my hands dirty. I lift rigs, I put them on racks. We source energy, and we deploy more hash rate. So it's awesome.
So your job is just to find the energy and plug in miners and enhance the hash rate under Luxor's control, sort of thing?
Yeah, essentially, I'm a pleb plugging in rigs for myself and for Luxor. So it's pretty much living the dream right now, man. It's awesome.
And what about your own like mining stuff? Like, what are you up to? And share only what you feel comfortable sharing, obviously.
Yeah, I've shared on Twitter my hash cave in my shop on my property. I just got a few rigs running in there, and my wife thought I was another degree of crazy when I was drilling holes in the side of my shop at 1 a.m. in the morning last winter to get the exhaust the hot air out so that they didn't overheat and they would actually run. So anyway, those are all going good now. And just so mining at home, it still makes sense even at today's price if you're running an efficient machine on residential property electricity rates. So it's still pretty awesome in that regard. And then yeah, just still doing a bit of stuff in the stranded nat gas and the oil field, and whatever else I can lay my hands on, right?
Are you inclined to like go around Canada and find stranded energy resources? Because if for no other reason, just how stupid regulations have been, that there seems to be, and not even just in oil and gas. I mean, there's probably a bunch of like really small scale abandoned like hydro in different parts of the country and whatever. Like, have you been compelled to look into that and like see what kind of markets see what kind of molecules you can bring markets to?
Yeah, man, that's my El Dorado, the ultimate search, right? The never-ending search for stranded energy resources. So you'll also see a few weeks ago, I posted on a video on Twitter. I went and checked out a private hydro dam in the mountains close to me, not too close to me, but yeah, essentially there is a whole bunch of these independent power producers who have 100 to 120-year-old infrastructure that was built for the silver and the mining industry back in the day in the mountains. So you got little hydro dams that are now, they can't sell their power to the grid anymore because they've been pushed out by BC Hydro and Fortis, where I am here in British Columbia. So essentially, independent, sovereign, stranded hydroelectric dams that have their own power production capacity, and a lot of them have nowhere to send it right now. So that's definitely one of the areas that I'm focusing on right now.
I presume many of those are owned by the province, though, right? Like, are they even willing to sell them to private enterprise? Like, is there a bunch of red tape involved?
No, like the ones I'm talking about are all owned by private individuals. So these are independent power producers who own the land, they own the dam, they own the water rights to the river, and they have been selling power to the grid historically, but due to certain developments, such as the provincial government building a massive Site C dam up in northern BC, they haven't got their power contracts renewed. So there's one area of opportunity in my area. And then things like Colorado just brought in a law where it's illegal to flare any gas at all. So a lot of the oil guys there, at 100 plus oil are going crazy if they can't pump their oil, because they have gas flare. So they're wanting
They
us
need
to come in there
solutions.
and take the gas off them, right? So there's always opportunity all over, and that's definitely a major focus. It's just going around and finding those.
Yeah, that's super exciting, man. I won't make you share any more of your secret expeditions or anything like that, but I mean,
It's all
we're
over
all
Twitter. Don't worry
we're
about
all yeah, I was gonna say we're all thinking it, right? We're all like,
it.
there must be so much power that is just has been stranded for a variety of reasons, and why can I not plug some ASICs into those power sources?
Yeah.
It's crazy exciting. Um, Anything else you want to cover before we shut this thing down? Anything else you want to get off your chest?
What did I see here? I don't know how. So another cool thing about Bitcoin mining is, and then it just cuts right to the heart, the base layer of the Malthusian versus the Promethean struggle that we're going through right now, right? So we see all these energy, whatever they are, the regulatory and the fiat guys who say we need to use less energy because we're in an energy crisis, and there's not enough energy to go around in this world. And that's a Malthusian view of we need to reduce our consumption or else humanity isn't going to be able to survive, right? Well, we reject that view, right? We choose to take the Promethean view of production and creating more energy, and the more energy you create actually allows civilization to flourish, because it's a direct correlation between cheap energy production and civilizational flourishing throughout history. And so it's a beautiful thing to see that Bitcoin mining is the manifestation of that Promethean production of civilizational flourishing, where it's the absolute best monetization of stranded and cheap energy production. And that's going to actually be good for humanity, not bad for humanity.
Very well said. And I totally agree. And it's so, I mean, this is why we call it clown world, right? Because so many things are perfectly the opposite of what is true or good for humanity. And these are the policies that at least some or many of the political class in the world today are pursuing. Because I've been exploring on my pod a lot, like the idea of progress, right? And because how do you know how to apply yourself or how to orient yourself, like where you want to go, if you don't know, well, how do you get to where you want to go if you don't know where you want to go, basically? And like, maybe progress on a civilizational level is somewhat emergent, as we all decide for ourselves what we value, it just bubbles up. But certainly there's been like a mantra of progress imposed on people by the political class over the last several decades. And I think we'd all largely reject that. But it begs the question, like, what is progress? And, I've been exploring on this podcast, like, well, how is like that 30-year-old dude who lived in, ancient Manoa 4,500 years ago, and who was in good shape and ate good food and like pursued meaningful work, and like, life was just good. And maybe he only lived to 65 and not 77, but who cares? I mean, what is that the main metric? Just having, because it certainly is in our day and age, like life expectancy is like one of the primary metrics of progress. And side note, perhaps this is why we like our medical care system is so obsessed with just getting people to hang on to every last breath of life, even when they're like so much of who they are and their ability to engage in life has departed. We have such a perverse approach to death, broadly speaking. But, point being, what should be progress? And someone brought up on the podcast the other day, and which is kind of what you're referring to, is like at least one of the metrics should be how much energy is available per human being, right? Like, what is the energetic capacity per each human being on average? And as you say,
that electron.
Yeah, and as you say, like, I think it's pretty obvious that the more energy available to each person, at the very least, the more options you have to increase the quality of your life, even if you don't take them. And I think even by that metric in the US, it's like it had been going up for a long time, but I think it's actually started to reverse course. someone will have to check me on that, or I'll have to check it later. But I think it's actually started to go in the opposite direction, which of course, based on this logic, would be bad. But I think it's very encouraging that what Bitcoin represents for the bringing to market of more and more energy and fostering an energy revolution actually is going to bode extremely well for, at least the options that we have available to us and the energy that we have available to us to execute on or devote ourselves to whatever we find most meaningful as individuals and as a species, basically.
Yeah, it's when the electrification of everything back in the late 1800s was a step change for society in terms of living standards, right? And now Lynn Alden talks about this all the time. If we at no point in history has society moved to a less dense energy source and actually progressed. So like burning wood to burning coal to burning natural gas and oil, and now we're going to a less dense energy source in wind and solar, and we think that's going to be the salvation. Like, what about nuclear? We abandoned nuclear in 1950s, and what WTF happened in 1971, right? So we're never going to get to, a Kardashev, even the type 1 civilization on the energy scale, unless we choose to adopt more dense energy sources rather than less dense.
Yeah. Well, hopefully the brief fiat interregnum will be seen as an abomination in the story of history, and we quickly corrected course and wound up in a place that was orders of magnitude better on every single domain and metric you could think of. And this is what we're doing. This is what we're talking about, and this is what we're both, devoting our lives to. And it's a tremendous privilege, and it's been awesome to talk to you further about it all today, man. So I appreciate it. And if any last words, let it rip, and then we'll shut it down.
Yeah, I have hope, man. I think we're winning. Like this is what we're doing, and we're going through the fourth turning. You'll see on my pinned tweet there, like the 5 most transformational books I read in 2020 was When Money Dies, The Fourth Turning, The Bitcoin Standard, The Price of Tomorrow, and The Sovereign Individual. And I think if you don't do anything, just go read those 5 books, and it'll give you an excellent representation and idea of where we've come from, what we're doing now, what's going to happen in the future from Jeff Booth's book, The Price of Tomorrow, and then kind of how we need to conduct ourselves as a society through the sovereign individual and the Bitcoin standard. And it's like, I appreciate guys like you, the amount of quality content that's out there now in terms of podcasts and books and online Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces. Like it's been amazing in my journey in terms of speeding it along, right? So I think we're winning, and it's going to be amazing. I'm excited and I'm hopeful for the future, and that's what Bitcoin gives us too, right?
100%. Well said, man. And those are amazing book recommendations. And good luck in what you're doing. I look forward to catching up again in another 6 to 12 months and see how things are going then.
Thanks, buddy. Have a good day.